Dr. Nita podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nita Polite Wilson, founder and CEO of Dr. Nita Enterprises. And as a C-suite trusted advisor and board director, I help members of the C-suite community reframe diversity conversations from difficult to different. Today, I am thrilled to have with us Rick Girard, and we're going to have a real conversation from the C-suite. Rick is the founder and CEO of Stride Search and author of the book, Healing Career Wounds. Rick, welcome. I'm excited to have you. I can't wait to dig into a few chapters of your book.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having me. And can I just add, I'm also the newly formed founder of intertrue.ai. So
congratulations.
yeah, we
Okay.
just
Stop
launched.
the presses. Tell us about Intertrue AI.
We just launched last week, as a matter of fact. So we're on this mission to eliminate bad interviewing from the planet. And so by doing that, we created an interview platform that basically runs the whole interview process with a human and allows the human to be able to gather data that's relevant to core values alignment as opposed to bias or, any other, any other things that go on during the interview process that are not in the best interest of the organization, really.
So how much does that rely on AI, artificial intelligence, and what's that going to look like for the future? Because it seems to me that while we're automating and trying to make things more streamlined, sometimes we take people out of the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's designed, the AI is designed to help the human to ask the right questions and to understand, okay, well, you need to dig deeper here, or there's not enough information here to make a decision. Also, this person might be lying here, or they're telling, those sort of things. So that's where the idea, that's where the product, the AI comes in. It really provides a lot of value because we want to make sure that we're providing completely unbiased, evidence-driven interviews across the board. So no matter who shows up, they get the same interview.
That is fantastic, especially when we know that there is a lot of bias in interviews.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Some of it is intentional, some of it is not. But if you're a human and you've got a brain, you've got bias. So we all accept that.
Yeah.
So this is kind of making sure that it's bias proof. So tell me, so now I'm interested. So we're going to get back to why we're talking in a minute, but now I'm interested. So tell me, how did you manage to come up with something that, even though it's relying heavily on artificial intelligence, you can still take the bias out of it, because the people who build artificial intelligence are people who have bias. So how's that working?
Well, I mean, we're not there yet right now. Like that's kind of the 2.0 version of the product. I mean, we just launched basically the MVP of it that allows the human to run the process and gather the right information. So we've got a long road ahead of us, especially on the AI. I mean, the machine learns, and essentially the idea is it pulls the data that we collect and it learns from that.
Fascinating. Well, Obviously, I'm going to have you back next year for another conversation around this.
Totally.
First, though, I want to start by asking you to interpret one of my favorite quotes from Andy Stanley. And it says, leadership is all about taking people on a journey. The challenge is that most of the time we are asking people to follow us to places we ourselves have never been. Interpret that for me.
To me, that means startups are scary as hell, and hopefully you can get people to join you.
Yeah. In terms of a startup being able to create belonging, let's look at it from that standpoint. If a leader has not been intentional about their own journey of belonging, but they're asking people to follow them on that journey, especially in a startup, how do the two work, or are they necessarily in conflict with one another?
So it's funny because we hear a lot of people talking about culture and how that's important, but culture is kind of like this subset, or the result of values, and values are what drive culture, right? So to me, values kind of transcend culture, and we all have different values. And when you bring in people who align with those values, it doesn't matter who they are. Essentially, you're putting yourself in a position where the organization has people that align with and they operate and work the same way. So it creates a scenario where it's less risky, because I think people are used to operating that way, but also it's easier to lead those people because they align with the same values that you do as a leader.
Give me an example of what you're talking about, especially since you work with so many startups. Do you have a case study of one startup in particular that got it right the first time?
No.
No? How does it usually go?
No, and it's funny because I'm usually brought in at some point. So my search business, I'm usually brought in. Hey, look at, we've got a co-founder. They're not really quite working out. They're disruptive to the business. We need to figure out how we can exit this person out.
The
Right.
co-founder.
Sometimes it's co-founder. Sometimes it's an executive that they brought on board. Sometimes it's just a key person on the company. Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of conversation that we engage in about that. But, like when you look at smaller companies and startups, I mean, it's all about getting traction fast and like getting somebody who can do the work. And it's not about really finding the right value-based match. It's about finding somebody who, like, hopefully works out. I mean, that's really what it is. It's entirely like with startups. It's, you talk to a bunch of people, and startup founders don't like to interview people. They want to get to the next thing and get the work out, right? So the first person that comes along that they perceive as being somebody who's going to be successful, that's who they hire.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of a scenario of you take what you can get, not what the business needs.
Yeah. So I know that in your own history, you've had a very interesting corporate career journey, and that led in part to you writing your book last year in 2021. Tell us just a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I came up through the ranks of, well, I wanted to be an artist at first, and then, I was trying to find myself. And then I got into snowboarding, and I fell into a career, essentially. I was recruited by my cousin's husband to move up to Sun Valley, Idaho, to live in a ski resort area. I was moving up to snowboard, and I fell into a recruiting career. And I was fortunate enough to work in an environment where I was doing recruiting in the Silicon Valley, and I've been in that realm for most of my career. Loved it. I was around software and tech companies and seeing all these really cool things that were happening, and hearing these really crazy things that were happening, and like you're in the inside. So it's been like a really fun ride. Probably about 9 years ago, I decided to shift the model, and then we just went into like a straight retained search model, because I just felt like I wanted to provide more value to the companies that I work with, other than me just supplying them resumes and hoping that they hire somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of hit that second mountain, so to speak.
Yeah. So mountain. So I was going to ask you, how did you get from snowboarding to recruiting? Because most people think that there's some kind of journey where you're kind of connecting the dots and it's progressive. My journey was training, and then consulting, and then coaching, and then now having my own business. But all of those different experiences kind of blend and led me to here. How do you go from snowboarding and the strengths of snowboarding to recruiting?
Yeah, well, I mean, like when I moved up to Idaho, I mean, basically recruiting was the job that supported my snowboarding. Like that was the way I viewed it.
Okay.
Luckily, in God, the first 6 months I was terrible at it, and then I kind of started to get it, and then I started, a year or two in, all of a sudden I'm getting really good at it, and I'm making a lot of money, and so. Like I said, it was like the journey was one of, I kind of would follow my passions, and then it kind of connected me to a job that I hated at first, but then grew very passionate about later on down the road.
And I think that's so important. Oftentimes when I'm talking with leaders or mid-career folks, or folks that are just looking for their next career, I try to encourage them that if at all possible, follow your passion as your profession. Not everyone can, and I think you and I are very, very blessed to be able to do that. For those who can, it's amazing. But I'm also reading lately that following your passion is not necessarily the best thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, my passion has always been like activities, snowboarding, surfing. Now I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Like I love that
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
And that kind of motivates me. I think it's just a different type of passion.
Hmm.
Like that now my passion is more about learning and making things better and impacting the world in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what drives me through my craft,
Hmm.
which um, I can't say I was always passionate about it, but I was always passionate about, being able to live a lifestyle that I wanted. And that's what drove me.
Yeah. When I think about how you're saying one passion led to another passion led to another passion, I'm thinking about also being a fitness instructor. And it was first trekking on a treadmill, then it was aqua aerobics, then it was kickboxing, and I found my love for cycling. And I had one person who was just visiting, and he decided to come back regularly for a while. When he had to move with his company, he came up to me and he said, I want to thank you for your leadership. And I said, I need you to give me a little bit more, because from my perspective, I'm playing loud music and I'm yelling at you guys. He said, no, you're giving us leadership because you know everybody's name. Brand new people that come in, you get them settled, but you know how to get the class started for the regulars. You know when a regular is having a day that is impacting their performance, you know when to lighten up, but you also know how to push just enough. He said, you know your people. And so, to your point, although in my career it's all about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, it's one of those helping functions. But even as a fitness instructor, it was still a helping function. It was always
Yeah.
focused on helping people get better. So when we're talking about following our passions for our careers, it doesn't necessarily have to be in one category, but instead we're looking for a theme. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. I think for me, it's a little bit more, not necessarily a theme, but more purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in like, I, I, I was fortunate enough to pack up and move to Hawaii for a while and live there, which was really nice. But I felt like I didn't really have a purpose. Like I wasn't fulfilling my purpose. I was just kind of living. I mean, I was doing a lot of surfing and I had a much better tan. But other than that,
I don't know. I got a pretty good one over here.
my tan goes away in like 10 minutes. Um, yeah, I started to feel at some point, I'm like, there's a greater purpose for why I'm here that is kind of driving me. And that's what's driving me now.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about purpose in your book. And so during our conversation, I'm going to read a few select passages from part one of your book. There are
Okay.
4 parts: getting ready, the search, the interview, and the offer. And I found that part one spoke to the work that I do specific to cultivating belonging in a culture. So before we go any further, tell us a little bit about your company, Stride Search.
Yeah, we're an executive search firm. And what we do is we help companies hire the strongest person. And um, we do it from the perspective, we actually bring an interview process into play. So we don't just find a person, hand them off to you and hope that you hire them. What I've discovered is that the biggest point of failure in most companies is the actual interview itself.
Mm.
And we don't recognize it too often, but most people, like I spoke to a room of like, there's a little over 300 or close to 500 executives one time. And the first question I opened up with was, raise your hand if you've ever had any formal interview training other than what not to say.
Right.
3 people.
Yeah.
Okay. 3 people. 3 people raised their hand. That was it.
Wow.
And I'm like, these were like seasoned corporate executives. Like this was actually a fairly big function. And that was an aha moment for me that like, so what's going on? Like, and I've seen people make hires based on commonalities. Like, I mean, this is got totally true story. I had a CEO that interviewed a VP at one point, and I debriefed him at the end of the interview. I said, how'd it go? And he goes, oh, it went great. We want to hire him. I go, great. He goes, we met for 45 minutes. What'd you guys talk about? Oh, we talked about the Oakland A's. It's his favorite team. It's my favorite team. And he went all into grave detail about like what they talked about in the Oakland A's. And I go, how is this relating to the job?
Right.
And not at all.
Yeah.
But they had something in common, and they were both passionate about it. And he goes, I liked his passion, so I'm going to hire him. By the
Yeah.
way, he was a bad hire.
Yeah.
That's what ended up happening. But too many times, I mean, like people don't know how to interview. So what ends up happening is, we end up, just having conversations that have zero purpose to them.
Yeah.
And, the thing is, if you're trying to build a company, a small company, you need to line your company with A players.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have a process that attracts A players. Well, having a conversation with somebody that's totally like out of left field that you're unprepared for and doesn't even challenge that person does not attract an A player.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is a really good example of similar to me bias. Not all biases are bad necessarily. Similar to me bias says, because we have something in common, I'm going to lean in your direction.
Yeah.
But to your point, if that is misdirected, if we don't carry out the interview process appropriately, we're still making bad hires, even though we've got so many great things in common. But to your point, what do they have to do with the job?
Exactly. They don't have much to do with the job,
Yeah.
And to me, it's, there's two aspects to a successful hire. I think most people look at it just basically, does this person have the skills to do the job?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of it. But if you look at companies like Amazon, 70% of their hiring decision is based on whether or not you can align with their leadership principles, their values,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If you actually can give examples of how you live their values, that's how you're going to be successful in the organization.
Yes. And conversely, now more people are looking for companies that align with their personal values. And we're going to get into that a little bit further into the conversation.
Yeah.
Community, we're going to pause right here and pick up with Rick when we get back next time. And we're going to start with a few key passages from part 1 of his book, Healing Career Wounds. So please come back for that. There's so much more to unpack. In the meantime, if you'd like to hear this conversation again or any of my other previous broadcasts, you know where to go. DrNita.com. On the landing page in the top in the center, click on the button that says Keeping It Real with Dr. Nita podcast. Please share, like, subscribe, and let me know how you're dealing with these conversations. These conversations are for you, so please give me some feedback. Until next time, this is Dr. Nita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.